Tonight on The ReidOut.
Secret Service said they have dissuaded him from coming to Capitol Hill. They told him they don't have the resources to protect him here. So at the moment he is not coming, but that could change.
I would come, I'm going to punch him out. This is my mom.
I would pay the fee.
I've been waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds. I'm going to punch him out, I'm going to go to jail, and I'm going to be happy.
We are seeing more of that incredible video of Speaker Nancy Pelosi on January 6th demanding protection from Trump's government and making sure lawmakers of both parties stayed safe, while Trump infamously did nothing. Also tonight, the chilling new questions being raised by the January 6th Select Committee about the Secret Service and members of the FBI. And Senator Ron Johnson might have a second career in stand-up comedy, because the audience sure was laughing at him at this debate with Mandela Barnes. And he wasn't even trying to be funny. But we begin the ReidOut tonight with reality crashing down on Donald J. Trump, with the House January 6th committee reminding us that Trump was the driving force behind the attack on the Capitol. He's reacting like a man who knows the walls are closing in, as evidenced by his 14-page rambling, incoherent letter to Chairman Benny Thompson today, responding to the committee's subpoena. Just one of many shoes to drop as his legal exposure grows by the day. Starting with his most immediate threat, the ongoing investigation into classified documents seized from Mar-a-Lago. The Wall Street Journal reports that 2 Trump aides are now witnesses in the probe. One was seen on surveillance video at Mar-a-Lago moving boxes and told FBI agents he'd moved them at Trump's request. And a second aide, who has also been subpoenaed in the Justice Department's January 6th probe. On top of that, an appeals court in Washington refused to postpone testimony from Mike Pence's former chief of staff, Mark Short, in the DOJ's investigation into January 6th, signaling that attempts by Trump to invoke executive privilege to preserve the confidentiality of presidential decision-making were not likely to prevail. That would clear the way for other people with knowledge of events that day to come forward and testify. Just as Trump is raging about being forced to testify next week in a defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll, who has accused him of rape. But the question for Donald Trump is, will he have the guts to testify to the January 6th committee, since he was the sole beneficiary of the insurrection and the only person who can answer to every aspect of the plot? Committee member Jamie Raskin has already called him out as a snowflake.
I mean, if somebody accused you, Rachel, of trying to overthrow the government or topple an election, I think you would probably be the first person to say, no, I want to come and testify about that and clear up the record. Or alternatively, if you did it and you're proud of it, well, then come forward and testify about, why you think you are the new Mussolini leading a right-wing movement to overturn our government, but have something to say.
Trump lashed out on his failing social media platform and in that letter to Thompson, which was full of his usual false claims. But look, let's just be clear. Anything that he's saying now should be discounted by what he admitted to his aides in real time.
He had said something to the effect of, I don't want people to know we lost, Mark. This is embarrassing. Figure it out. We need to figure it out. I don't want people to know that we lost.
The president says, I think it could have been Pompeo, but he says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost. We need to let that issue go to the next guy, meaning President Biden.
He was looking at the TV and he said, can you believe I lost to this effing guy?
And I said, does the president really think that he lost? And he said, a lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it.
Not only that, but we now know that as early as July of 2020, Trump was going to declare victory regardless. The one person who could have believed actually that there was fraud in the election was Donald J. Trump. And he didn't believe it. We also got fresh insight into the activities of congressional leaders that day, and in particular, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, essentially acting as President of the United States, working to secure the Capitol and trying to save the life of Vice President Mike Pence.
Okay, and that calls back. Okay, I worry about you being in that Capitol room. Don't let anybody know where you are.
The video also shows Speaker Pelosi requesting deployment of the National Guard, flanked by Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and his number 2, Steve Scalise, catching Scalise in a lie, since he suggested back in June that Speaker Pelosi was involved in decisions to delay deployment of the National Guard. The new video inside the chaos brings into stark focus Trump's dereliction of duty, since we've now seen behind the scenes that congressional leaders were actually trying to stop the violence. We've even seen behind the scenes video of the happy Trump family backstage at the rally prior to the siege in the Capitol. But the one thing that we actually have never seen, ever, is real-time video of Donald Trump, President of the United States, trying to stop the violence, because we know that he didn't, as evidenced by additional video of congressional leaders from Speaker Pelosi's daughter, filmmaker Alexandra Pelosi, and HBO.
Well, D.C. has requested the National Guard, and it's been denied by DOD. I'd like to know a good goddamn reason why it's been denied.
Joining me now is Asha Rangappa, former special agent with the FBI's Counterterrorism Division and the assistant dean of Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs. Kurt Bardella, Democratic strategist and contributor to the Los Angeles Times and USA Today. And Noel Casler, comedian, former staffer of The Celebrity Apprentice and host of the Noel Casler podcast. Thank you all for being here. And Asha, I'm going to start with you here at the table. This is a lot. Like, that's a long intro because, so, you know, and the thing that Donald Trump has really managed to do is get away with being a tax evader, stealing documents from the federal government and taking them home, putting them in his bedroom and wherever else he wanted in his house. You could go on and on and on, violating, you know, the norm and the act that you're not supposed to profit from being president. He and his kids were profiting. He's really gotten away with everything. But as a professional, somebody who's been in the FBI, somebody who's investigated criminals, does it feel to you like accountability actually is sneaking up on him? And what do you make of this subpoena and whether or not he could even try to evade it, the January 6th subpoena?
Yes, Joy. I think that Trump is realizing that the impunity that he was enjoying for so long really was a result of the trappings of the office that he was in. And now that he is no longer president, he is, in the eyes of the law, a nobody. And so just like you and me, it will catch up with him. And he still has a lot of power and influence, and it might take a little bit longer than it might for your average Joe. But yeah. I believe that it will, and it is, and we can see that happening. With regard to the subpoena, listen, there's really no upside to him to testify. Yeah. The one thing that he may have been able to claim until yesterday was that he truly had a bona fide belief that he had lost the election. Right. And that was disabused yesterday. So for him to show up would either be for him to make an excuse or justification, which we know he's not going to do, or to double down and basically prove the community's case. Right. And also be lying to Congress because he knows he didn't. Correct. Yeah. So I don't see that happening. But I think that the committee giving him that opportunity sort of calls his bluff, that he has the opportunity to clear his name. Well, and is baiting him, too, because and Noel Casler, thank you for being here. I have been coveting having you on the show for quite a long time. So thank you. Because you actually know Donald Trump, you know, and there are not that many people that have had what I don't know if you call this the benefit of being in his presence, actually seeing how his mind works. Right. But, you know, it's not just the trappings of the office of president that have protected Donald Trump all his life. It's the trappings of being rich and of being famous. And so he's gotten away with everything. And so the Donald Trump that you know, can you see any possibility that he could be baited, which, let's just be clear, the committee's kind of trying to bait him to come and testify. Can you foresee him ever doing that?
Absolutely not. As much as I would enjoy it, because it would be must-see television, because he would melt down like he did in his 14-page rant. But there's no way he would, because he's too vulnerable. He's not going to swear under oath to tell the truth. And he couldn't compose himself for the amount of time that the committee would, you know, interview him. And the thing I know about Donald Trump is there's sort of two Donald Trumps. There's the behind the scenes guy who knows what the deal is, right? Who knows he lost the election. And then there's the public face of Donald Trump that he hides behind the trappings of wealth and, you know, having ex-police officers around him and Secret Service and the flag and all these kind of things he uses to intimidate others. And his world is crumbling now. I think yesterday was one of his worst nightmares because people were seeing that he knew he lost, and they were also seeing Nancy Pelosi showing real leadership. So I don't think there's anything in it for Donald Trump to testify, and I think ultimately he's a coward.
Well, and I mean, he's already been exposed now, Noel, as not being a billionaire, never having been a billionaire, not being as rich as he said. That's now clear. He's been exposed as clearly a derelict president, somebody who didn't really know how to do the job and was incapable of doing the job, and then who also led an attack on the United States. Can you get inside, Donald Trump wanting to stay president for life? We kind of get it from his personality. But what about the people around him? How is he drawing people around him who are willing to go along with what are clearly felonies in order to keep him in office? That's the part I think most people don't understand.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to understand. You can understand it with the more craven GOP politicians that are just looking to stay in office. How he kind of attracts these people into his orbit and then corrupts them is a mystery. I never talked about this before, but I went to high school with Bobby Engel. That's the Secret Service agent who Trump choked in the back, of the SUV. And that guy was a Marine, a straight shooter who had a long career in the Secret Service that was distinguished. And then Trump comes along and he has a way of sort of inveigling himself in with these kind of guys and how's your family and all this stuff. He smooth talks them, and then next thing they know, they're sitting in an SUV with him and he's saying, take me to the Capitol, while we attack it. And I think before you know it, you're involved in his criminality, and then people worry about their own culpability and they shut up because there's a lot of people saying, hey, don't say anything, we'll get you out of this. And if you look at Trump's track record, he has gotten most people out of things, right? He hasn't really been held accountable. So it obviously shows a lack of moral clarity, but he knows how to find those kind of people. He's instinctually.
Well, and